Hello everybody, Marcus Anthony here. I'm the Associate Professor of Foresight and Strategy at the Beijing Institute of Technology here in Zhuhai, China. And today I'm talking from the 8th International Conference on Humanities and Social Sciences Research. In fact, I'm speaking 2 days before the conference and recording this just for the benefit of all those people who won't be at the conference. My talk is called A Critical Future Studies Perspective on Sensemaking and Embodiment in the Digital Society. Okay, a little bit about Zhuhai. I won't say too much. It's about 1 hour from Hong Kong. If you get a boat from the pier, not too far away from here, you have a nice lovely ride down to Hong Kong. Well, pre-COVID you would have. And Zhuhai is a very nice, quiet town. It's about 1.5 million people. Known for its environment. It's been voted the most livable cities in China several years in a row. That's enough about Zhuhai. You can come here if you want to. I'll be glad to see you. Okay, so the key question I'm going to attempt to answer today is, what are the potential and ideal futures of the body, somatic intelligence, and society as Web 3.0 unfolds? Somatic intelligence just means the intelligence of the body, so the information that we receive from our body, basically. Web 3.0 is essentially the Metaverse, a three-dimensional internet. The second question is, how can we retain embodied presence? Embodied presence, as I shall explain, is the ability to be or to feel present in your body. So my main argument is going to be, we need to ensure that future human virtual environments permit healthy embodiment, or human intelligence and authenticity may be gravely damaged. So these are the 7 sections. I'm going to put in the description below the exact time that these occur within my presentation. If you want to, I know exactly where they occur, because the presentation will take a little while to finish. And since this is on my YouTube channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button or the like button. Okay, firstly, a very little bit about myself. Secondly, I'm going to introduce what critical future studies is, and also something called causal layered analysis, which is my method. I'm going to describe the difference between deep futures and money and machine futures. The context I'm going to outline, which is the development of the Metaverse, embodiment, and the crisis in sense-making. Then I'm going to go into a bit more detail about embodiment, something that I call integrated intelligence, and the extended mind. Near the end, I'm going to outline 4 possible futures of the Metaverse. And my conclusion, of course, will come right at the end. I'm going to say a bit more about something that I call the authentic self. Okay, I'll just add one more thing to what I said at the beginning. In my university here, I teach future studies, sense-making in the digital age, which is very much related to this, and the 4th Industrial Revolution. I've taught a few other things here and there, but that's pretty much what I do. And I do this kind of research. Around here, I'm also a regular presenter on the Asian Professional Futures Network. And you can find a bit more about me on www.mind-futures.com. Okay, this research is part of a project that I began about 3 years ago called the Power and Presence Project. And there's a book which is the main outcome of it, and I'm hoping to have that finished and published by the end of this year or the beginning of next. That would be late 2022, early 2023. Okay, about critical future studies and causal layered analysis. Now, you'll notice as I go through this presentation, on some slides there'll be quite a bit of writing, but I don't read from them normally. I might just read a few points. If you are interested in that point, you can freeze the video, stop the video, and read that particular slide if you want to. Otherwise, some of them I'm going to go through quite quickly. Otherwise, it will just take us too long. Okay, so what are these things? Critical future studies. So it's not merely about trying to predict the future, but it's also about analysing the future and thinking deeply about it and how we might want to change it. Now, Sohail Inayatollah, who is a chair in future studies for UNESCO, has developed a little model, the 6 pillars of future studies. And these outline pretty well the kinds of things that people like me like to discuss. The first is mapping the future. Then there's anticipating, which is basically prediction, trends analysis, timing, when are things going to happen, what kind of time period are we talking about when we're trying to think about it, 10 years in the future, 20 years, and so on. Deepening, this is when we challenge our own assumptions. Creating alternatives is coming up with more creative and broader ideas about what might unfold or what we might want to unfold in the future. Transforming the future, of course, means changing it. Changing what we think might happen. Okay, causal layered analysis. I'm not going to say too much about this. This won't be explicit in my presentation, it will be more implicit. So the kind of things that I talk about are inspired by this method, although the method does not appear explicitly. So this is a 4-layered model which helps us to look deeply at issues and problems regarding the future. It can also help us to build or plan for futures that have a deeper level of thinking. So the first level is the litany level, or the surface level. I see I've written that there twice. And this is basically analyses that are fairly shallow and don't really think too deeply or challenge the future. For example, it might be a report in the media or a government announcement about something. Okay, analyses or ideas, discourse about the future which goes deeper might start to talk about systems, which is the way things are connected together. Okay, and this especially includes society and culture, but it can include lots of different systems: technology, education, economy, and so on. Now, when we start getting into the really deep levels of analysis, when people are thinking deeply, we start looking at the worldview and the paradigm. So sometimes the speaker like me will talk about their own worldview or the paradigm that they believe is inherent in their own field. Other times, someone like me might point out that somebody else has a particular worldview or paradigm which underpins their thinking, but they're not conscious of it, because most of the time worldview and paradigm are not explicit and they're not conscious. So when we analyze things, we can point out those things to get into a deeper level of analysis. Finally, we can talk about myth, metaphor, and mind. Okay, in Sohail Inayatollah's model, he doesn't have the mind part there. I added that. That's the way I like to deal with the most basic or primal level of problems. Myth means the narrative or story. Metaphor means the images and symbols. Mind means the consciousness structures that underpin what we're talking about. Okay, let's move along. So what are deep futures and money and machine futures? Well, this is just a simple model that I developed. So a money and machines future is basically a future that assumes that the main thing to think about is technology and perhaps how to distribute wealth, how to get material possessions like have flying cars and a faster internet and so on. But these are not deep depictions of the future. They don't try to think beyond what the status quo is or challenge trends that are occurring in the present moment. These tend to be typified by high levels of depression and anxiety which are rising in the current era, which is the COVID era, but these trends were already beginning. And in particular, they don't really have too many green ideas or psycho-spiritual perspectives. They don't encourage people to think deeply about the meaning of life. Now, in this rather simple model, Deep futures are futures that have a deeper level of thinking. They include embodiment, ideas about mindfulness, perhaps in spirituality, asking or encouraging people to think about the meaning of life. They encourage individuality, but they don't necessarily discourage community, which is very important, or working together. Diversity and sharing of power and wealth would also be important values in these kind of systems. So, in my ideal futures, they would resonate more with these kind of deep futures. Okay, the context of what I'm talking about: the metaverse, embodiment, and the crisis in sense making. Okay, in case you've been in a coma for the last 6 months, there is currently a race for meta space, and he's our little friend. Oh, sorry, he's not little. I shouldn't demean him in that way. He's our very powerful friend, Mark Zuckerberg on the right. And I like this photo. It came out at the time where he started to announce the idea of the metaverse, which was about 4 or 5 months ago. So we have Facebook, or Meta as it's now known, attempting to build a Web 3.0, a three-dimensional virtual internet. Okay. And Mark Zuckerberg believes that this form of the internet can have a sense of embodiment. So haptics, which is the science of how to incorporate movement and felt sense into virtual systems, is coming along, kind of blandly, but he hopes that within the next 5 years will reach such a level that we'll more or less feel like we're in the real world or close to it. Okay, but of course, there's been a lot of criticism of the metaverse concept. A lot of people are quite worried about it. So that's that context. Now, one or two things that Mark Zuckerberg has said, and you can read through this if you want to. One of the things that he did say, which was kind of controversial, he said there will be no logging off. Okay, I'm sure he regrets deeply saying that, because people have visions of a kind of a matrix, like a snow crash world. Actually, the term metaverse comes from the novel by Neil Stevenson, I think it was, which depicts people stuck in the metaverse, and some of them at least not being able to get out. And Mark Zuckerberg thinks that this will be an all-immersive platform, so you can do your business and work and socialize and learn all in the one platform. So that's the vision of Meta. Now, Horizon's workrooms is one of the platforms, I guess you'd call it, that Meta or Facebook is developing. It's a bit crude now. The images that you can see here on the screen on the right, left-hand side, are pretty much what you'd see if you use this system. And it's basically a 3D Zoom, okay? So you go in there, and then you can interact with people more in virtual space. It's pretty basic now if you go in there. Other companies are now, of course, have entered the race. Companies like Microsoft, Roblox, Epic Games, and there's probably a whole heap more, including in China where I am. Okay, so whether we like it or not, it's very probable that the metaverse or Web 3D is going to keep developing further. So I don't think it's realistic to expect that this is not going to happen, and unless we develop an authoritarian system to regulate against it, it's going to be part of the future, or at least the future in the next 50 years. It's hard to predict what will happen after that. My take then is what we need to do is start thinking about how to create this in a healthy way that can help make our futures better, and help make our communities stronger, not weaker. Okay, meanwhile, a few more contexts. It's undoubtedly true that human beings are becoming more cyborg-like, and At the moment, it mostly works with our mobile phones, right? Or we jump into a car and it's connected to the internet through the computer or through the GPS. Mostly we can cast them off if we want to, unless you're Elon Musk, whose idea of Neuralink is to embed a chip in your head. Hard to see how many people would like to do that. It's not necessary either. Other companies are just developing like strap-on helmet kind of devices which you can take off. But we are definitely becoming more cyborg-like in the sense that our intelligence is becoming more embedded in the internet and enhanced in some ways. Perhaps in other ways we're being dumbed down, but we are potentially more intelligent and definitely more connected. We're also becoming less embodied. Okay, we're tending to disconnect from the somatic body or the emotional body, where we tend to be overstimulated, and my main argument is that when we lose connection with the somatic body, we start to lose connection with the inner world. So the internet is mostly exteroception, not interoception. So it's mostly about outward projection, not inward. We need to make sure that we keep a balance of those things and make sure that people understand what's occurring in their own system, in their own emotional body, and in their own psyche. Otherwise, we'll be too easily controlled by the external parties that are out there on the internet, wanting to either directly and deliberately manipulate us or unconsciously, perhaps, through their own biases and unconscious projections. Okay. And further still, we have the crisis in sense-making. So it's becoming more difficult to understand our place in the world, in nature, in the universe, because more and more of our time is being spent online. And less is being spent outside, and less is being spent in nature. So in a sense, we're becoming increasingly disembodied. Trust in our institutions and in media has crashed. Trust in governments and leadership has crashed. The rise of misinformation and disinformation is a real crisis. And policymakers and governments really, in many instances, really don't know what to do. And they have to pretend to have higher levels of certainty in a very fast changing world that they may not have. And if they make pronouncements they're not certain about, they're more likely to get them wrong and afterwards lose credibility. People will say, you didn't really know what you're talking about, you were lying. Well, they might have been lying, or maybe they just didn't know what they were talking about for sure and had to try to instill a sense of confidence in the population. So, either way, it's a crisis. The meaning crisis is related to this. What meaning do we make of our lives? Do we give our power away to big tech, for example? I don't think that's a good idea. Do we believe in conspiracy theories? Do we go into more extreme psycho-spiritual, quasi-religious movements, which we're seeing on the political right and the far political left as well? Or do we find some other way? I'm suggesting it would be better for us to gain a greater understanding of our own bodies and minds. That way we can be more responsible about the kind of worlds that we choose to engage in and the kind of worlds that or information that we allow to enter our own psyches and our own minds, okay, our own lives. Okay, some key points. So, establishing an authentic self via embodied presence is vital. I'll explain that in a moment. If we are to diminish these things, I believe it would be a major civilizational error, okay? And that could be catastrophic. Because so much of our wisdom is contained within our somatic body, okay? And we find wisdom in presence. It's hard to think of someone who's wise, for example, whose mind is like scattered all over the place. whoever you think of as being wise, normally there's someone who's able to be present and calm and has some mastery over the body and over their own mind. So, the authentic self, I argue, this is an idea that I came up with from my own experience, is the part of our wiser part of ourselves that we experience when we learn to slow down, relax, and be present in the body. So embodied presence is really the mindful relaxation into the present moment. Okay, a bit more about embodiment and integrated intelligence and the extended mind, including a few more key principles. So what is integrated intelligence? Well, I've actually updated my definition of this recently after doing some more deeper thinking. If you go back to some of my old books or articles, it's slightly different, but this is how I define it today. It's the often conscious and active employment of a fuller range of human cognitive abilities, including mental, somatic, digital, and intuitive, to solve problems and to live successfully. I say it's often conscious because once you get into the psyche and the somatic body, it's a lot of what happens there is not conscious. It's about bringing it into consciousness. So I'm not claiming that it's all conscious. So if we had to map that, it looks something like this. We can no longer just think of intelligence as existing in the prefrontal cortex or the mind being like a computer, because that's not how the mind functions. It never did, but with the internet, it's even more clouded. This map is even more incorrect than it was. So, above the conscious mind there at the bottom of the screen, the body, the somatic body, the wisdom the intuitive wisdom that we can glean from our own bodies. The psyche is essentially the unconscious. This is the world of dreams. You might have intuitions. And perhaps if you meditate, you might even have things like auditory hallucinations or visionary experiences, which could be meaningful or not. Okay? A lot of people are getting into ayahuasca and hallucinogens and things like that. I don't do those things personally, but that's all part of the psyche. Next is the web. We are deeply connected now to the internet. There's no getting away from it in the greater context of society, and it can be a good thing as well as a bad thing. The extended mind is the recent science which indicates that our mind is actually in constant synchronized interconnection with the world around us. Okay, other people, cultures, groups, and nature. The non-local mind is essentially the mystical and spiritual experiences that people have reported for a long time. Now, this is not normally accepted in mainstream science, but I believe it's extremely important in understanding who we are. Okay, the extended mind. So I'm just going to say a little bit about this and give you some evidence that for this realm of science. For example, one researcher, Tom Ference, the Okinawa Institute of Technology and Science, believes that human beings are deeply connected in terms of each other and the environment and nature. Okay? And to really acknowledge ourselves as human, we need to acknowledge that we are connected. Okay? The mind extends beyond the body, beyond the prefrontal cortex, into the body and out into the environment. Now, the establishment position is generally more the reductive prefrontal cortex model of intelligence and mind. Okay, so, but this model of the extended mind is now coming into its own. It's hard to dispute that this is an important part of human consciousness. An important part is what's called neural synchronization. Okay, and this is what really challenges the idea that mind only occurs in the body, in the brain. For example, when you engage with other people or other groups, your brain activity tends to synchronize with them. Okay, we tend to synchronize footsteps, conversation, heart rates, and so on. neural frequencies tend to synchronize, so they match the pattern of those we're with. This has been known for quite some time now. And it's been mapped through brain scanning. A good example is co-pilots. When co-pilots have been tested for this, they find that pilots and co-pilots neural architecture tends to mirror each other, especially at takeoff and landing, when, of course, they most need to communicate with each other, or be in harmony, if you like. Okay. Anne Murphy-Paul is another person who believes very strongly in the extended mind. You can find her book, The Extended Mind. It's a very good book. A lot of the research you'll see in this presentation actually comes from her book as well, so I'd just like to acknowledge that. Her take is that it's very important that we develop that connection with the body, and if we can do that, and we can learn to do that, we become more intelligent as human beings. We become more intuitive, because the body registers a whole heap of information that the conscious mind doesn't. And to ignore it, well, why ignore it? Because it can be a valuable source of data. We have all these sensors in our body, and they register information even when we're not aware of it. Here's an interesting experiment which affirms what she says. So Antonio Damasio did this experiment where it's an online a computer-based game where you give the players 2,000 virtual dollars and 4 decks of cards, and then you get them to play the game. Basically, they flip the cards up and down, and they can lose or gain money. Now, unknown to the players, 2 of the decks, A and B, are loaded negatively, so you get more losses than gains. And decks C and D are more rewarding, okay, as they play this game. Now, it's important to remember that, as I said, the players don't know that's the case. So what the experimenters did, they monitored the stress levels of the players through the skin conductance, okay? What they found was that just after playing the game for a while, the skin conductance spiked just before they clicked on the bad decks, okay? And yet, when these players were asked, what's the difference between any of these decks, they had no conscious awareness that any of the decks was better or worse than the others. So their body was registering the negativity, the penalty, before their conscious mind was aware of it. Another interesting thing is that the higher the intuitive intelligence level of the player, the better they were as the game went on. So, as I said, what this means is the body can process information faster than the conscious mind. It makes us smarter, okay? So the model of the extended mind suggests the poverty of increasing disembodiment in the digital age. And it also tells us that we have to be careful not to create a metaverse where people are disconnected from the body, because we're not going to make ourselves smarter, we're going to make ourselves dumber in a very important way. The non-local mind. I'm going to mention this very briefly. So the non-local mind is not mainstream science, okay? You can find this in the writing of people like Rupert Sheldrake, Dean Radin, Stephen Schwartz, Deepak Chopra. They use different terms. Sometimes they even use the term extended mind for this. But the difference with the more mainstream accepted version is that they posit that information can move into our mind or the psyche, consciously or unconsciously, from domains or locations that we're not in. So it could be anywhere non-local. Could even be the other side of the world, potentially maybe even somewhere else outside the Earth. Okay, so that's why it's controversial. There's no agreed upon mechanism for how this might work. That's the main criticism of it. There is actually a lot of experimentation into this area, which has gleaned statistically significant levels of statistical significance. But it still tends to be ridiculed in mainstream science. I don't agree that it should be. I think it's a very important level of understanding of the world and nature. And the other thing is, this is not uncommon in many cultures, and it's not uncommon in human understanding and expectations. If you ask most cultures around the world, a significant majority of people believe in this, in the non-local mind to some extent. Okay, and it is included also in many traditional cultures like Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Islamic, introspective traditions, and so on. For example, in the Tao Te Ching, which is written or spoken 2,600 years ago in China by Lao Tzu, which means old man in Chinese, this is what he said about the world. In chapter 47, he said, "Without stepping out the door, you can know the world. Without looking through the window, you can see heaven's way, or the Tao. The longer you travel, the less you know. Therefore, the sage knows without traveling, perceives without looking, completes without acting." If you read the Tao Te Ching, it's full of ideas explicitly or implicitly which indicate the non-local mind. So that's just one example. I could pull out many from other traditions, but I won't. So together, the ideas of the extended mind, which is mainstream science today, and non-local mind, I think we have something very important to consider about the nature of human intelligence. And it's very important that we keep connected to our bodies and intuitions, because they are a pathway to deeper levels of perception and information that we might not normally acknowledge otherwise. Excuse me for drinking. Okay. Why else is embodiment important? Okay, I'm going to go through these next slides fairly quickly. Okay, key point. Embodiment is essential for full human cognition and learning, and thus for the expression of the authentic self, and this should be no different in the metaverse. Another essential point. We don't learn passively like Neo in the Matrix. Neo got, the tube or whatever it is shoved into the back of his head, and suddenly he became a kung fu master. Well, this is actually in a way the same model in the factory model of education, where the teacher just shoves information into the student's mind and the student becomes learned and then regurgitates it. Why is it wrong? Well, we learn also very much through doing, through the body, and I argue through the extended mind. Which leads me to the next key point. The brain in a vat, or brain equals computer metaphors, are self-limiting and self-stultifying. This is a misconception which emerges from the mechanistic paradigm. Okay, the mechanistic paradigm is the model of nature and the world, which suggests that nature and the universe is inherently mechanistic or machine-like in nature. And if you read any philosophy of science, many agree that this emerged perhaps with some of the atomists in ancient Greece, and it also appeared, with the Newtonian universe, and then the computer age, perhaps the machine age, also concretized this model of the mechanistic universe. So the brain as a computer is really emergent of that. It's a natural extension. And it's quite common in many cultures now. In Chinese, they call computers diannao, which means electric brain, for example. Okay, so there's quite a few people that are critical of this metaphor for many reasons. One of them is Frederick Valet Turangio, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's at Kingston University, professor of psychology. So he believes that physical interactions with the world are extremely important. You can't just think of extending intelligence by inputting information like a computer is fed, code. Okay, Here's some more precise ways that we know through the body and the environment. There's something called the nature effect. Okay, so when we're in nature or even exposed to pictures of nature, okay, our brains and our bodies respond positively. Okay, they inspire a sense of abundance and permanence and generosity within us, whereas urban environments tend to make us feel competitive and slightly more stressed. Nature improves our ability to be present and attentive. Okay. It also gives us a more generous attitude towards the future, so it makes us feel more optimistic. It also inspires awe. Now, the experience of awe enhances creativity and the capacity to generate new perspectives. And this is something that was put forward by Dasha Keltner, who's a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. Okay, so the mind is attuned to nature, but the problem is that we're spending less time in nature. 7% less as of 20 years ago. 60% of Americans spend less than 5 hours or less in nature a week. Okay, children are spending less time outdoors, and 50% of us live in cities. Within a short time, next 30 years or so, it'll be up to 70%. So we're losing that capacity that nature gives us for a more generous, relaxed, and wise sense of self and experience of the world. Okay. So the next idea that I'm talking about is the expansive gaze. Now this is a very wonderful idea, not that well known, is that when you use your peripheral vision, you start to use the rods of the eyes. Okay, the cones of the eyes are more in the center, and when that happens, you start to relax more, and it actually makes us smarter. So, our ability to relate to information spatially improves. So our memory improves. Okay, if information that we receive is received from a broader expanse of space. Okay, so spatial memory, working memory improves. So a key here is that if we're using small screens, even a computer this size, or God forbid, a smartphone, for many hours a day, this retards our capacity to tap into this kind of intelligence, okay, this expansive intelligence. Now this is why Robert Ball, who's Associate Professor of Computer Science at Weber State University in Utah, says, well, you might like to consider not investing so much in a faster processor on your phone or computer, but consider investing in a bigger screen, or put several screens together. Okay. Interactivity is another important thing. Interactivity is the manipulation of physical objects while we're learning. Okay. Now, this actually enhances our ability to solve problems and to also be more creative. And it taxes the cognitive structures in our brains less when we're using our hands. And this is true of arithmetic, complex reasoning, planning for the future, and creativity, as I said. So this is something to consider. Now, if you consider a lot of the important discoveries and breakthroughs in science come through the manipulation of the physical world. A very good example is James Watson. Okay, he was half of Crick and Watson, who first mapped the DNA molecule. Okay, especially the way that the chemical bases fitted together. This is in the 1950s, but Watson built a model of the DNA molecule, or at least he started to, and eventually clicked it all together it came as a kind of aha moment. And so this is a really good example of how physical manipulation of systems can make us smarter. Okay, what about some solutions to some of these problems? What are some tools which help us out of the matrix? So I'm going to quickly go through these. As I've said before, if you want to stop the screen, just freeze the screen for a moment and read the screen or the slides, feel free to do so, but I'm just going to whiz through these. Okay. One way we can improve our futures, especially the future of the metaverse, is through biophilic design. Make the systems nature-friendly. Embed natural symbols and images within the systems. Okay. Also, just having your desk near a window can help us be more creative. Make sure that we keep in nature as balanced with being indoors. Keep an interoceptive journal, as Ann Paul from the Extended Mind says. Okay, this basically means you're going to record your feelings and the sensations in your body as you're making decisions. Okay, and then looking back at them and reflecting on whether those feelings were accurate or not. I've suggested a similar thing for some years, which is an integrated intelligence journal, and it's similar to what Ann Paul said. But I suggest also that you can record dreams, intuitions, and if you're meditating, you might have some mini dreams or words that come into your mind, or impressions or feelings. You can record those in your integrated intelligence journal. Noticing is another thing. We can do this also when we're online, like I am now. This is a mindfulness process. And there's many people who talk about this. Leonard Jacobson is one of my teachers. Mindfulness teachers is one. Thor Abrahamson at the University of California employs Tai Chi in teaching a little bit about this. So noticing is just noticing what emerges in your body without judgment as you're engaging the world or even engaging online environments. Okay. Body scan is a kind of a form of this. So Kabat-Zinn from the University of Massachusetts has done experimentation and research in this area. So the body scan is, again, deliberately scanning your body, maybe starting from your toes and feet, and moving up and down your body, and becoming and breathing into the body so that you become more conscious and more aware of what's occurring in your body. Okay, and this just helps us become more aware and develop a closer relationship with the body. Okay, so some of the findings from on this, the body scan, is it can help us relax. It reduces stress, especially if we name what we're experiencing. Like if you name tension or worry or maybe anxiety. So you give it a name, and that just helps us to relax. Why this happens? Not quite sure. Maybe just bringing it into consciousness helps us integrate it. 3 breaths is a very simple tool that I've often used. So even when you're at a computer or in the office or somewhere, you can just take 3 breaths and just help yourself ground in the body, in the moment. You can also just focus on a nearby object for a few moments and just bring yourself into presence with it. Another process which I've encouraged people to do is, if you're online and you tend to be in a volatile environment or you find yourself getting triggered, just notice the point at which you're getting triggered by what someone wrote or said or saw, or a news or media article, and bring your attention back into the emotional experience of that for a moment. Perhaps you can close your eyes and just allow yourself to feel what that is. Perhaps you can even name it. And then you can, if you have a habit, for example, of then writing something or responding in a way that's, I would call, drama-prone, or that projects anger out onto the world or judgment, you can reimagine a preferred response. And then over time, this can help change your behaviors. Okay. Okay, so this is just a little bit more about that. Many rituals is another way. Okay. So instead of doing a mindful ritual like 3 breaths, you might just like to tap 3 times on the table, for example, or count from 10 to 1. That might be a little ritual. Or look out the window at the tree. Like there's a tree just outside my window here. Maybe I might just look at it for 3 seconds and bring myself into attention with it. Okay. Lastly here, I'm going to talk a bit about 4 scenarios. So 4 possible scenarios of the metaverse. Before I do that, let's have a quick take on where are we with the metaverse at the moment. Well, the truth is that we're not really very far into it. If you look at Facebook Horizons, for example, it's a bit clunky. You've got to wear these VR glasses. There's problems because of wearing the glasses. They tend to heat up. They cause rashes sometimes in some people. They cause headaches and dizziness. The number of pixels in them is perhaps not quite ideal and doesn't match the way your natural eye functions. So these are causing tons of problems. So people can become disorientated. Mark Zuckerberg says it takes about 2 months for your brain to adapt to the Oculus glasses. But he does say that he hopes that within 5 years that all this will become good enough so that you feel present in the metaverse. Well, we'll see. Okay, so what are scenarios? Now, scenarios are not predictions. That's the main thing I'll emphasize here. Scenarios are they are possible and probable images of the future, which we deliberately choose in order to enhance and broaden our thinking about the future. Okay, and they could be desired futures or preferred futures. They could even be undesirable futures. Okay, and they can help us get a diversity of stakeholders, more people involved in planning and thinking about the future, so that our thinking doesn't become too constrained. And they help us stretch the mind, okay? It's important that when we think about scenarios, that we don't only think about what we think is going to happen or probably happen, and don't dismiss ideas simply because they seem a bit crazy if the scenario process brings up something a bit unusual. Because remember, not that long ago, doctors were prescribing cigarettes and or letting blood. 20 years ago, people probably would have thought it crazy if you told them that in 20 years' time they would be spending time arguing with other people on a platform like Twitter and engaging in them in wasting a lot of their emotional energy calling people idiots. So don't dismiss unusual scenarios offhand. One method, which I'm going to use here, it's called 2-factor scenarios. You take 2 relevant and impactful factors, and the way you do this, you come up with 4 distinct scenarios. And one factor should be high impact, and the other one should be high impact, but with less certainty. So the 2 factors that I've come up with here, because of my topic today, is degree of metaverse immersion versus degree of immersion in the body or connection to the body. Okay, so it's embodiment versus immersion in the internet. So these are not mutually exclusive, so we're trying to avoid extremes. Now when I put these 2 factors together, what I come up with is 4 scenarios. So on the vertical scale, it's VR immersion or virtual or metaverse immersion, and across the horizontal plane, it's embodiment, how much we're connected to the body. So when I do this, I come up with these 4 scenarios, which I'm going to go through now. Don't worry if you don't understand this too much. You can reflect on it or look back through the presentation. Or you can go and read Steve Tye's book, Rethinking Strategy, which is a good book on this topic. Okay, first scenario, top left-hand corner, snow crash wonderland. So this is a dystopian future where there's high level of immersion in the metaverse, but a low level of connection in the body and with our integrated intelligence, or at least with our intuitive intelligence. So this is, it's dystopian. Basically, it's a snow crash from the original book by Neil Stephenson. It's the Matrix. It's not a positive future. Basically, we're stuck in the metaverse. We are subject to the manipulation of external parties, bad faith actors. We lose our power to make our own choices because we become so ensnared or enmeshed in other people's agendas that we lose our own autonomy, our own agency. So the algorithms basically control us. And most likely it has high levels of censorship and authoritarianism. The second scenario, which I came up with, I've called Brady Bunch brunches. So this is low immersion in the metaverse, or completely doing away with it, and also low connection to the body. So it's kind of a throwback to like the 1970s. And so there's no metaverse. We've done away with it. We don't like it, but we're not thinking too deeply about things either. Okay, entertainment and amusement. This is kind of amused to death kind of situation, which people were talking about back in the 90s, from the book Amused to Death. I've forgotten the name of the author, but that was back in the 70s. So this is not a deep society, and it's not a likely one either, I don't think. I don't think it's likely that people are going to just choose to go back and live in this kind of society, given the attractions of the internet in the modern age. Okay, back to the body is, again, it's a low immersion in the metaverse, or we discard the metaverse, or we regulate against it because we don't like it. But it's high level of immersion in the somatic body. Okay, so we have a high level of intuitive intelligence. So we unplug, society slows down. This is kind of a utopian society where we value the awakening process or deepening processes that maybe encourages meditation, including science into scientific investigation of meditation and spiritual experience. But again, not very likely for most of the world's population, I don't think, because again, I don't think most people are just going to turn off the internet. Some people may. Okay, the mindful metaverse is basically my preferred future at this point in time. So it has a high or moderate level of immersion in the metaverse, okay, but it has a high level of connection to the body. So from the way I see this is that the high level of immersion in the somatic body and awareness of our intuitive intelligence is what defines this. So yes, we can engage in the metaverse, but we also spend time in nature. We make sure that we stay connected to the body. We don't give our power away to the system. Okay. We allow ourselves to balance the scientific and rational with the intuitive mind. Okay, it's basically an open society. So that's my take on 4 possible futures of the metaverse. But there's still a lot of uncertainties. I'm not going to go through all these, but things that could really disrupt things, ongoing COVID, and how that changes our relationship to the internet, the rise of China, where I am, people's willingness to, shall we say, give their power away to authority, the escalation of the crisis in sense-making, and so on. This could change a lot of things. Okay, so let me finish up here. Now, if we allow ourselves to create a more of a mindful metaverse, I think the benefits are that we will gain a stronger sense of empowerment. And I think this is really important, because I think what's happening is that as people get sucked into these online environments, they give their power away to the algorithms and to the agendas of other people, the clickbaiters and the media companies, governments, and so on. As we connect more with the body and stay centered, then our sense of agency returns. And this in turn, I believe, can help us ground us again in the authentic self, even more deeply than what we've been doing so far, okay? And help us to answer the question about who am I really, and who do I want to be? Not what some blogger or viral video tells us that we should be thinking about today, okay? Or what we should be outraged about. So this would be cultures that represent deep futures and deep questioning. So that's all for my presentation today. I hope you enjoyed it. And there's a few sources of reading here, my own, and some of the other sources that I've referred to or employed in this presentation. And if you'd like to get in contact with me, you can find me here at marcus.anthony@cgt.bitzh.edu.cn. And you can also find me or more about me on www.mind-futures.com. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you around, maybe even see you here in Zhuhai one day. Bye for now.